Hello, so thank you for joining us for this conversation today on hybrid work. My name's Emma. I work in strategic partnerships at Fellow, and I'm going to be moderating this panel. So we have some very great, very intelligent leaders here today to give us some ideas on hybrid work that they're going to share. So maybe before everybody introduces themselves, I'll contextualize this conversation a bit. So as we've been leaving the pandemic, we've seen that leaders and employees are definitely not returning to the same workplace that they once knew. So as hybrid work unfolds into a new era, there's new challenges, new workflows, new tools, and these are all going to be shaping the future of work. So this conversation is actually tailored around nuanced questions that leaders are now scratching their heads about as we're heading into this new era with hybrid work. We have leaders from a bunch of different fields, a bunch of different backgrounds here today. And I'd love to start with quick introductions. So maybe if everybody wants to introduce themselves, speak a bit about what you do at your company, and then share what you're hoping to contribute to this panel, that'd be great. So maybe I have Guy on my screen right beside me. So would you like to introduce yourself and kick us off?
Yes, sure. So first of all, thank you for this opportunity. I'm always happy about talking about this specific topic, which is a topic that I like a lot. My name is Guilherme. I go by Guy here at Oyster. I am an engineering manager at Oyster. I'm from Brazil. I am actually a former lawyer and international relations analyst at Self-Taught How to Code. Have had my own companies for the past 10 years, and now I have joined Oyster in this mission to change the world. What I expect to be bringing to the debate here is more related to the distributed work, because Oyster has no offices. So we've been working fully remote, as people say, but we like to use the term distributed. So I want to bring this side of not having the office and how has that impacted how we work.
Thank you. I have right beside Anna.
Hi, my name is Anna Karin, but I go mostly by AK, and I'm the founder of a startup where we actually focus on how can we enable people to create their best work-life balance. And a big part of that is being able to work and live where you feel your best. So we've been practicing for 3 years on actually establishing a distributed office, ways of working processes, and learned a lot. But besides that, I'm also a consultant. I'm currently at Spotify working as an engineering manager, where I get to see how scale is affecting also the hybrid workplace. So that, I guess, could be my contribution to share the challenges seen from both a small startup perspective and also a bigger company.
Awesome. Emily?
Yeah, hi, I'm Emily Bussey. Thank you for asking me to join. I am the Director of Communications at Loom, which is the async video communications platform for work. And I oversee both external and internal comms for which is also a distributed team. So I think for this panel, I was thinking I could share a little bit of my perspective coming in to help build out internal comms processes for a team that is growing really quickly, but also fully distributed as well.
And Jason?
Awesome. Thanks again for having me too. I'm Jason Zhang. I'm a Senior Director of Product at Upwork, in charge of incubated products. Before Upwork, I worked at a lot of different startups. I was a founder of my own and worked at various different stages. So I think what I can bring to this conversation is just how you think about how you bring different experiences to people through the process of having to communicate and having to be able to collaborate with teams in a distributed manner, and how you can be able to kind of maintain that throughout the entire course of your product development cycle.
Amazing. So we definitely have a great lineup of people. We're lucky to have such great minds together here today. So let's start with a little bit of context. So after 2+ years of remote work, employees eventually went back to the office on a part-time basis. So the transition from being fully remote to hybrid obviously brings a new set of challenges, obstacles, whether it be workflows that don't fit the hybrid work model, or maybe managing conflicting time zones. What are some of the examples of systems within the organization that won't work anymore after 2+ years of remote work?
One part is around the employee motivation or benefit packages, that before we could have them centered around office culture, we could rely on the more, what benefits do we associate with this company? And now with the distributed workforce, different countries, different setup, different choices. We need to be more individually focused when we design like a company's benefit packages, or like what are we offering that is not just like money or equity, but the flexibility that come at hand. It needs to be very, very personal.
Absolutely, personalizing, flexibility. Guy, you looked like you were about to jump in.
Yes, I was gonna jump in with the most obvious one. Is like expecting people to be working from one specific time to another specific time. It's not no longer about when you are doing something, but about the value that you're bringing through your entire journey at the company. So this is for me the biggest change, something that we're not gonna come back to. At least I hope so.
I agree. I think to what you just said, I think the thing that comes to mind for me as a system from like an internal comms perspective is sort of the traditional idea of the all hands or the company announcement is a lot trickier, and just sort of the reliability of being able to capture the attention of your entire team at one time. And I've come from a perspective of always working on relatively small teams. That's sort of the point of view, like, 200 or less. So there is that you were realistically able to sort of do those in-person all hands before everything, and know that everyone's sort of, even if they're shifting in their seats or they look tired, like they're paying attention to some extent. Whereas now it is hard to figure out how do you find not just the moments in the day where people have the energy and the focus to kind of all come together and to listen to something that's outside of their workflow that might just be related to the company's operations or something higher level than their current work, but even just the actual logistics of getting people together, and what that actually does to kind of what the challenges that presents for cohesive and clear internal comms.
Like that's definitely one I've also thought about too, but even like the day-to-day portions of, I remember back before people worked remote, you would just go into conference rooms and forget to even dial in because you're just like, oh, if you're not even here, then you're not going to be part of this meeting. You can't do that anymore, right? Like it's constantly now needs to be part of your day-to-day like operations. Is you have to think about the people that you're not inclusive of, that can't necessarily be here today in this room, but you've been working for 2 years where you've been just as effective, where everybody's been in their offices and everybody's been wherever they need to be. Being able to not having that as like part of like the normal ecosystem is like no longer acceptable. And even you're actually just losing way too much. And I think like agree on like one of like Guy's points of like time zones and how you just need to be able to figure out within your own teams on like the times that you can be able to like meet in person and the time that you are able to just do async work, right? Because it now like even more puts into like the fact of that common statements like, I just want to get my work done. Like, does it really matter when I get it done? So as long as I'm like getting my work done, like even now more than ever before, like it's is very apparent that that is true. But there are times that you need to be able to communicate and collaborate in person, and you just have to be very respectful of people's time zones. So no one's coming in too late, or no one's having to come online like too early.
Absolutely, no starting at 5 a.m., finishing at 10 p.m. at least I would hope. So would you say that there's any consequences to hybrid work that people aren't necessarily thinking about?
I mean, I think the main one that I've heard about from other companies, Upwork is like fully remote. I think it's like very much like Oyster, where we have one home office, but not that many people really go into it that often. But like the one that I've heard about before is like when there's expectation of certain people coming in on certain days. I think like the best example that I've heard about is like EAs, like they're expected to come in on certain days to be able to help support people. But those people aren't even in because they are choosing to be even more lax with those rules. It kind of creates this like even further like class system of like, why do I have to be here even though the person I'm supposed to support is not even respecting these rules, right? So if you're going to make rules, the leaders have to follow them. The leaders have to be the ones that are providing that direction, or you're going to create even like more unexpected consequences of having people be back into work and just making that commute for no specific reason, because they were able to do this for 2 years, just running it from home.
Yeah, what Jason just said about leaders being a model reminds me of a conversation we were just having yesterday about people, like one of the smaller consequences that we all have felt, I think, since the beginning of the pandemic is like or if you've ever, since we worked remotely, is like the barrier to signing off is like so much lower, but also harder to kind of make that move for a lot of people. So it's easier to just continue working or work when you're really sick. And so that's something that we've been combating a little bit, is like, we've had some, people say, well, I wish that a company was a little bit more clear about, like, they say they want us to rest, but like, do they really believe that? And then having to kind of, so then the response kind of being, as a leadership tier, like, that's on us to model that. Like, we have to be the ones that are modeling that at all times. And that was true before everyone was remote, but I think even now, like, to your point, it's like, if people aren't modeling that, and then that doesn't empower their direct reports to make those decisions either. And so it's like, you can have all the processes and the guidelines in place, or like say it during an onboarding deck, but unless people are actually seeing it in practice, like, they're not going to feel like they can take advantage of that either.
This reminds me of a Super Managers episode, our podcast. We actually had Erin Thomas, who's head of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Upwork. And she was saying that although remote work did open up an entire new talent pool of people that could now be recruited for companies, the cost of showing up to work is often a lot lower for certain people. So it has become increasingly difficult for people to show up for work. So would you guys believe that hybrid work makes DEI easier or harder for people?
I can start on that one. And when I saw it for the first time, when we were thinking, and this is about consequences as well, is thinking about what is diversity here. When we're tapping the whole world, the very definition of what we are thinking about, what's inclusion, what's diversity, changes as well. I work as a hiring manager at the company. I work in the whole process for hiring new developers. And what are we thinking at Oyster is not only about those challenges that we had 10 years ago, but also are we hiring people? We want to have more people from Africa, want to have more people from South America, from different countries. We want to have a company that has a bigger cultural diversity as well. We want people to bring differences to the table and show us them, because sometimes we never knew about them before. So the hybrid work there will bring this to the table, and it will make people more accessible. It's not about who is writing the document, but the document itself. At the end, we can bring those people in and bring the talent pool to the next level. And this challenge will come with that. But in my perspective, by allowing people from all over to be working from where they are, close to their family, friends, and to their culture, is already something that's coming with very positive impact to the world.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think one of the big things that it comes in that definition is the hybrid workforce, I think creates a lot more inclusion. Hybrid work, in the way that I think some people define it, is like some days in the office, some days at home. That in and of itself still requires you to be kind of locked to a geolocation. The hybrid workforce shouldn't. The hybrid workforce does fully encompass people and regions and areas that, like, you normally would not actually hire people to, because you would think you would have to start an office for them to come into. That no longer is true. So you bring a lot more just perspectives to the table, and how they're thinking about the problems that they're dealing with that relate to the problems that they're trying to solve for customers at work. It brings a lot more perspectives that are really, really valuable to have in that process.
It's kind of common, we talk about demographics. We say, like, okay, how are we hiring? How are we building up the workforce that will then provide the diverse perspectives? But one area where I think that the changes we've seen lately has brought some positive change, if we do it correctly, is actually on the inclusivity aspect. Because connecting back to what someone said, we can't rely anymore on like the water cooler talks. We can't just like do ad hoc meetings. We need to think like, okay, who am I not including in this conversation? So it's like the current situation forces us to be more structured, to have clear information processes, to have like, how are we making decisions? How are we communicating? How are we making sure that everybody distributed, working on whatever time zone they are choosing, have the information they need in order to do their job the best possible way? So I think that we might not be there, but us trying to set up that environment so that everybody has what they need is going to raise our level, and that is going to create a more inclusive environment for also those that are not. Some company cultures are more prone to the, if you speak the loudest, you get your way, you're going to get the budget, you get sway, people look up to you, like leaders become a certain stereotype. So this, I think, can be a positive outcome of adapting to a distributed workforce, but we need to spend time on doing the work to put the structures in place.
Absolutely. So do you have any tips maybe as to how we can even out the playing field for people who are working or can't benefit necessarily from in-person interactions?
I think that and now from a leader perspective, when you're my job is to enable others, I think it's even more crucial than before to be very structured and organized in your processes. Because if you have a process for something, it's going to be more difficult to fall into the subjective trap. You know how you're approaching different people, whether it's with information, whether it's with decision making, how you are including every perspective, but also with personal growth, career opportunities. It's I'm following the steps, so I can't just have an idea, react on it, and go more on instinct. I need to be a bit more robot-like in this scenario.
The other thing that this question made me think of was there was that article that McKinsey put out in January around how one of the things that leaders aren't thinking about as much is the idea of the sense of belonging at work. And so they explored that whole report about what is belonging and what are the challenges. And then actually just in March, so a couple months later, at Loom, we did a survey of 3,000 remote and hybrid office workers in the UK and US about connection and communication at work. And one of the questions we asked was sort of inspired by that McKinsey study about how do you feel when you're communicating? What are do you feel connected to others? And it was all about communication at work. And one of the interesting findings, we're going to actually share more of this later this month, was actually that people of color at the workplace felt like they had overburden on themselves more than their counterparts of over explaining or feeling like they had to add more context or feeling more pressure to be clearer in their communications and feeling a higher mental burden because of that. And so I think one of the things that pointed to, and we're speaking to some experts about it too, to add some context, is sort of this idea of similar to processes you were talking about, is making sure too that the tools that we're using to enable those processes are designed in such a way and accessible in such a way that people can access them with the same amount of expectation as everyone else, or the same amount of, because it's nice to say, bring your whole self to work. And we like to say that at Loom, but that's not true for everybody with the same tool. And so thinking about what those tools, processes, and expectations are that allow for greater inclusion beyond the traditional definition of what makes effective communication.
That's definitely interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys will be sharing in a little bit of time. Jason, are there any tips that you'd like to add here? Any comments?
I agree with everything that people are saying. I think one of the things that I've also noticed too is when you don't have that in-person interaction, it does. If you have the right tools and you have the right communication methods, it does really allow for the better ideas to shine, the better ways of being able to actually kind of go down a route for certain product ideas to kind of be able to come to the forefront. Some of the things that end up happening sometimes in normal offices where it's the common thing you see in movies, oh, all the managers are really tall, how do they get to that level? It's you have no clue how tall people are anymore. Height has completely been normalized in this entire remote world. I remember meeting a lot of my coworkers. I was oh, you're way taller than I thought you were. It's oh, you're not as tall as I thought you were. Did not say that to the not as tall people, because I'm one of the not as tall people. But it was it's one of those things where a lot of that's been normalized. And so it's a lot of what you are trying to be able to present and how you're being able to say that, as opposed to biases that just might or might not come in unconsciously to when you're actually in person in a room.
can I just tie one short thing to this last comment? Because I think that if we then want to make use of every single person's like true potential, like we want to use that, create the space where you just like go crazy, be your, do your thing. I think that maybe we could explore also the area of like manager versus coach. That could we make more use of coaches that could then sort of support this person to drive the change that they want to drive, and not have a manager sort of enforcing rules or norms, or like, this is now your job, do it like that, but rather coaches like helping people, like from the bottom up rather than up down. So that is an area that I hope to see more of, like coaches, not on like a higher level, but also for individuals.
And that is the important side of this, because whenever we bring things to be hybrid and we're not expecting things to be happening because of social status or because we are there to see people working, we have to value more trust. We have to trust people. We have to understand that they're doing what's expected from them. And while we have to trust people, we don't care who they are. We trust what they're doing. And of course, we care who they are. What I mean is, if we need to trust more, it's up to us as well to help people develop those things so they can trust themselves as well. Those abilities, I'm talking about speaking. We know English here, but not everybody knows English. At some point, you should know Chinese. You should know how to speak. We should give them guidance. We have this service at Oyster that you can go there and have every single week an appointment with someone who teach you how to speak better, how to make yourself available and be clear about voicing your own ideas. And those things are the ones that we should be focusing now, is improving how people are working, but not how they socialize and relate one to another necessarily to get wherever they want in their career.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Guy. So switching gears a little bit here, there's a quote from Ben Horowitz, and he says that absent of a well-designed communication architecture, information and ideas will stagnate your company, and it actually makes you degenerate, into a bad place to work. So there's this duality here of finding a balance between giving your employees independence and then standardizing different processes, which is just difficult to balance. So do you think that leaders should standardize a hybrid meeting culture? And if so, how can leaders do this without necessarily enforcing a system across the entire company?
I can go first here again. That's fine. The most important thing, and this is related to the first topic that we were talking about the changes that hybrid work is bringing to how companies work, is that we value time much more than we valued before. Before, we had to be somewhere for a specific amount of time, and we could use that time however we wanted. But when we were there, that's just something. But when we have people in different countries, different places, different time zones, we need to value their time. So if we are to have meetings, if we are to have ceremonies, I am an engineering manager, we have processes, and we have some meetings that we expect people to be there. And whenever we are there in those meetings, those sync meetings, we need to value the time of those people. We need to make sure that everybody understands what's expected from them and what are the goals of those specific meetings, in a way that communication will flow the right way and we will achieve specific results in that meeting. So we need to avoid getting to that situation where everybody's there and someone asks, so what's new? So what's this for? And when we do that, we're not valuing time, which is something that we need to value. Because of that, what we're doing is concentrate, always thinking about first, who's responsible for doing what and when, and who's the person of interest here to define what's the next step. Second, where are we saving that data and how can that data be fetched? And third, are we organizing ourselves the right way so we're valuing time during meetings? And those are the questions that I'm always posing in order to improve processes and make sure that we don't get to the situation where someone is holding the information or the information is not being shared.
Absolutely. And Fellow definitely helps with that. We have this saying where we say, no agenda, no attenda. So if you go to take your meeting and you don't have a fellow agenda, well, your meeting's canceled. You shouldn't be there because there's no clear purpose. Emily,
is
would
that
you?
really true? This is a personal question, because when I heard that for the first time, I was really excited about it. And I felt that at Fellow, you would get to a meeting and you would see no agenda. You would have like an emoji or like a GIF or something saying, okay, no meeting, let's enjoy 1 hour free because nobody added. Is that something that you actually do? How does that work for you? This is like, sorry, I'm asking you the question now.
We're switching roles here, Guy. We don't have an emoji pop up, but I love that idea. And somebody should definitely pass that along to the product team. It's more of, in my experience, it's been more of an informal message exchange through Slack, where maybe 15 minutes you go before and you see that there's no agenda aligned, and you say, okay, let's just take this extra 30 minutes or hour that we have to focus on other work, and we'll catch up next week instead.
Yeah, I love that saying. I need to start using that. One tactical way we've been trying to standardize our meeting culture, and this is definitely a work in progress. We've gone through a series of experiments. We've implemented a new meeting day, which has been fairly effective. But one of the things that we include in the onboarding materials, but we probably can get better at continuing to like pull it up, is we have a flow chart that we created around that just says at the top, should this be a meeting? And then it has the 6 questions that you asked that either guide you to synchronous virtual meeting, to a Slack message. And then under the Slack message, we use the like urgency tags, and then, or if not, to a Loom. And so similar, like it sounds like to you, when there's no agenda in a meeting, one of the things that we typically will try to do is to default to a Loom if there isn't a pressing urgent need to have that live time, or at the very least send a Loom before the meeting. Like that is a no-brainer, so that when you get on the call, you're having a discussion and you're having the output versus the like upfront context. And then one of the things that we've been really, really pushing, we just awarded an award for it at our offsite, is posting to the workspace. So like posting to the Loom HQ. So even if a Loom that I sent to a teammate for instead of a meeting is really only urgently relevant to us, but it could have other relevance to other people in the office or other cross-functional teams, posting that to our Loom HQ like allows it to just naturally surface based on the words that I used in the transcript. To other people who are following that tag or that topic, and it'll surface to them so they can see it. So that's something we're trying to really, really behaviorally change as well, around making posting a default versus an exception, so that sort of collective knowledge that's happening in all these meetings, whether they are async or sync, is finding a way to other cross-functional teams and is accessible to others through a search. So I think over time, we're hoping that will just continue to grow. But that's something we've been pushing as of late.
Absolutely, and we've definitely used Loom internally as well instead of meetings. And I've actually used it personally for like when reaching out to people. I mean, I won't speak too much about this because it has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but in the context of networking, sending a Loom video instead of an email, which is interesting as well.
Yeah, I think like Upwork uses Loom quite a bit for a lot of those as well. But I think the most important thing is making the default, like actually posting to public places, is absolutely key, because the more async you work, like the less people are actually there sometimes at the meeting that you set. But you want that information to transfer, and you want that information to be accessible for the person when they come back online in their time zone, right? And if you don't have a default culture of being able to be like very transparent about what happens in the meeting, decisions and action items and anything that might come out, then you're going to lose a little bit of that, and sometimes a lot of bit of that, depending on how many people and what type of people you have in your team, and like the type of people that the time zones you ended up having in it, right? And when it's not the default, it becomes really hard to remember to be able to do that.
I think that when I hear about like, are we enforcing structure? Are we being like overly rigid? Shouldn't we allow flexibility? I think sometimes about, comparing it to the agile ways of working. So now I'm assuming that, we're all familiar with like, agile methodologies. And now that feels like nothing, it's nothing controversial. But what happened, and what I think what contributed to the great like success of rollout, that it's now like it's nothing you even like you don't think about it as being something enforced, is because the agile ways of working is like, here you have a few, it's like a recipe. This is how you can create a sprint planning. This is like rituals that if you have them in your like ways of working, they will provide you structure, flexibility, and the whole team will have an aligned view. You also do like a follow-up in the retrospective where we do feedback and focus on improvements. It's like providing a structure to set your own process, like your own way of how are we using these tools. So I think that whatever structure you come up with at your company, like that serves your goals, because like companies' goals will differ. It's more like providing the recipe. And then once you've practiced on cooking that like lasagna, like once you follow the recipe, like very carefully, step by step, you're like, oh, I'm going to start to tweak this a little bit more, like the white sauce, a little bit more meat. And then like you, in the end, you create your own lasagna version. So I think that is how I view like being structured about meetings or ways of working. It's like practice it until you learn what you can tweak or not. And always evaluate, is this helping us reach our goals or is it not? Because no one way fits every company.
Absolutely. That's a good point and good analogy that probably made everybody here a little bit hungry. Okay, so next question is maybe geared a little bit more towards Guy and Jason. How technical teams are building and innovating, needs to adapt conjunctly with the future of work. So how would you guys say that technical teams need to take into consideration the intricacies of hybrid work and how they will impact the end users into consideration when building new products?
I guess I can start since Guy's been the lead for a lot of these questions. I mean, I think for the vast majority of tech companies, the way that you take like customer input and the way that you use that to adapt like some of your priorities and some of your product development cycles actually haven't changed that much with like remote work. I think like, for example, a lot of the ways that product teams and engineering teams get input is like either through user testing or feedback from customer support. Then those were all available in the exact same formats prior to remote work as it is today. Now, the biggest difference, I think, is like how those teams collaborate in order to be able to get to some of the ideas and brainstorming solutions. You no longer have the ability to, or it's not easy to just get 15 people into a room and whiteboard anymore, right? So again, it does come back to some of the ways that you want to be able to replicate that online. And so like tools like Miro or FigJam like allow you to have some of that collaboration throughout the course of your like cycle. But it's being able to like make sure that like for the things that you're able to like take input into to be able to like do your prioritization and put into the agile like routines, that you're able to do that, and then trying to replicate some of the level of collaboration that you kind of lose by not having everybody in there. But it's, for me, it hasn't changed that much. I don't think it's changed that much, as long as you're focusing on the areas that you want to be able to kind of you want to be able to still get back, and finding ways to be able to like serve that with all the technology you have in 2022.
So Guy, would you agree, disagree? What are your thoughts?
Yes. The first thing is for the engineering side of things didn't change much, because most of changes like, oh, I'm working for a company abroad, there's something that happened before, like 10 years ago. I could be working for a company abroad and be a remote worker, but most of times that would be something like outsourcing. I would be underpaid and things like that, but processes were still there. As a manager, the first challenge that we have now is that, as Jason said, we have way more tools in the market than we need. So we need to decide which tools we're using and follow those tools like to the heart. I mean, we need those tools, so let's use them and make sure that we are collaborating with those tools and knowing what are the expectations. Those things have not changed, because if we do not have a single source of truth, think that there will be a problem there. The challenge that we're facing right now, there are two main challenges. The first one is dealing with time zones. dealing with people that could, like in my team, I have someone in the West Coast and the PO is in Belarus and they do not overlap during the day. How can we handle that in a way that makes the team still efficient? This is one thing. The second one I would say is some other departments. Imagine for Oyster, we allow people to hire globally, so we need a legal team to be working, and legal people are used to be in the office, and they need to be working now remotely. They need to be working and collaborating with the product team, with the design team, with the engineers. So the challenge that we have now is going to those teams that were not used to this type of work and telling them, oh, come to us, let's work together, let's do something together. And sometimes we have to improve processes, think about how they're doing things, because we developers, we have been using Google Docs, Looms and Zooms for a long time now. And about the time zone, I have some interesting examples of how we can use that to our advantage. The truth is that we now have like a bigger time where we have developers available to solve problems. So this is good. So urgent fix at 5 a.m. my morning, it's 3 p.m. for someone else, so they can be fixing that. And we have managed to create some types of collaboration where we're working around the clock. So someone in Lebanon was creating a code and someone in the US was reviewing the code while the person in Lebanon was sleeping and improving the code. And then the person in Lebanon woke up in the morning and reviewed the code. So we can create those types of collaboration. And as AK said, it's about understanding the challenges and making small improvements all the time. Is understanding that a solution that works for one specific team at this specific time will not necessarily work for everybody in the company.
Absolutely. So being flexible, and I would assume very organized as well. So that's definitely very interesting. And on the flip side, this question is maybe geared a bit more towards AK and Emily. Hybrid work obviously has a lot of implications for hybrid communications. So how would you say that leaders can ensure that they're communicating expectations clearly and equally with people that are in the office versus people that are fully remote?
I think a lot about documentation. I feel like boring and like, I bring up all this, like you need structure and documentation, but I think that is sort of the key towards being not ending up in the traps of, yeah, I just saw you, here's the idea, I thought about this, should we just make a decision and go along? Because if you need to document something, you can sort of like, you make sure that you plan for, you can at least establish a routine of adding reflection there, because then it's something that can be shared and it can be there for asynchronous communication. So both in the personal growth there, I think it's fairly easy to have a process. For the team decisions, the project progress update, there, I think it's also like almost pivot to, I need to over communicate. This information needs to land and live somewhere, so that even if I have a in-person meeting, I need to document that and put it somewhere. Like, where's the place where we put updates? This happened. So I think it's about being like scrutinous on the information and communication. It's like, there's always someone that should be able to follow up on something.
Yeah, I have a similar answer essentially, and one of the things that we've been thinking about doing to make that ritual of documentation after meetings the default for both equal access for whoever someone is located is thinking about, I talked a little bit about when you decide to do an async Loom meeting instead of live, you can post it and all that stuff, but a lot of times we do still have live meetings. And so how do you make sure those are available? So one of the things we've been talking about is having the Zoom recording auto ingested into Loom and auto posted from certain meetings. So if it's like a team meeting level, like sort of dictating what level of live meeting will we just automatically ingest from Zoom, post to our workspace and tag with, X whatever tag. So trying to think of how do we leverage those tools to create those rituals and consistency that people can count on no matter where they're located.
Absolutely. At Fellow, in addition to using action item tracking through the Fellow agenda, we also like to do and encourage respond with the link. So the idea of linking something back to our internal wiki page and documenting questions that come up often so that you can just naturally turn towards our Confluence and where everything is posted. So Emily, I was wondering, how do you guys determine if something can be or should be held synchronously or asynchronously?
So I mentioned that little flow chart, and that's sort of the kind of core distillation of how we do that. And essentially the questions start with immediacy of response needed. If it can be understood in about 2 sentences or less, so like length and complexity. Is there a chance that could be misinterpreted or misconstrued, which might say, if yes, or if tone is especially important for that message is a consideration. And then the last question is taking real time or asynchronous the only way to achieve your objective? So thinking about timing and urgency, complexity and length, nuance and tone, and then desired output. And so to sort of looking through that lens and having a sense of where that should live. And we also have certain nudges for like if someone is scheduling a meeting, like kind of language you can use to suggest it's a Loom, or if someone's communicating in Slack and you want them to move it to a thread or something like that. Like there's some small ways we can do that. But as we talked about earlier, one of the things that we're trying to improve here is modeling from leadership and also just consistency across teams, not to the extent that we hold every single team to a super specific set of decisions, but at least a consistency in the framework of thinking about how you use that time.
That's helpful. Thanks for expanding on that. Okay, so we've had a ton of different interesting ideas here, from updating systems, going sync versus async. We even talked a little bit about DEI. And before we end this conversation, we ask a very similar question to all of our super manager guests. But what advice would you give leaders who are leading remote teams or hybrid teams for the first time and that are struggling to build relationships with their teams? Anna, I'll put you on the spot if you want to kick us off.
So this is something that we've really reflected a lot on Because Mondays, the startup where we're fully remote and people working from all over, and also most of them being consultants out with other companies. So they have other, like day-to-day teams. We still want to feel like we are a team, us. So what we realized is that we need to focus on building connections. It's not just about knowing, you are a product manager working with that company with those challenges. It's like, who are you? So I think the advice I would give to a new leader in a hybrid world is like, make sure you plan for like establishing a connection with the people that you work with, especially in your team, and that this will require time. Like time not only in calendar, but there's like time to be curious, to be present, to listen, to build I actually know you as a person. Like I think that's important, like in live scenarios as well, but especially to make people feel like it's start to establish that trust and build that relationship over like a video. You need to work harder for it.
So I'm going to second that. The first thing is, I was talking before about trust. And the first thing I would say is making sure that people understand that you trust them and that they're not going to be evaluated based on how available they are, but about what they're doing, what they're expected to be doing. That's the first thing. Make sure that you trust people. The second one is make sure that the processes and how the company works and what's expected, it's clear enough for everybody. So whenever they're doing something that you expected them to be doing differently, you would have the links, as Emily said, for them to go there and refresh themselves about why that's important, not only for your team, but for the whole company. And the third one is about socializing, as AK said. Here at Oyster, we have experimented, for example, with the async week, where nobody could have meetings, for example. Everything should be async. And what can we learn from that? But during those weeks, which I found amazing, where your agenda was clear, social calls were always incentivized. You should be doing them. Go to different teams. Go not only to the people that you work with. So you should tell your peers. Go to the legal, to the CSMs, to the marketing teams. Talk to people. People there are not from your bubble, because in the office that made sense. You would see people, you would have lunch with people from other departments. But in a remote work, it's very easy for you just to hide yourself within your bubble and just be working with that amount of people and be happy. So incentivize people to be. We have donuts where you are randomly assigned people from other departments so you can have social calls and things like that. And this is important because at the end, it's about, as we said, culture sharing, understanding different backgrounds and where we want to go and grow as a company.
We use Donut as well, and we have async week as well. Jason?
Yeah, second, third, everything that everybody's been saying. I think it's like really, really important for people to care about the culture they're building, that relationships matter. And then the fact that like they want people to feel like they have an environment that they're comfortable sharing, they're comfortable talking about anything, and they can talk about the good things, the bad things, and whatever that might end up turning into. Like that's important to be able to develop, regardless of if that person is sitting across the desk from you or across like a Zoom from you, right? Because I think like you need to be able to establish that on a day-to-day basis. Because like, you know, I think people alluded to it too. It's like, it's really easy to like log off for a half second to go do something, and really hard to like be able to completely log off in the office, in your home office. But it's also really easy to isolate yourself away because there is nobody walking by your desk saying hi, or going to the coffee to be able to like chat for a half second, right? So if you're not concentrating on creating that culture on a day-to-day basis, people can isolate themselves away, and it starts then becoming that hybrid work culture, that remote work culture, no longer is as beneficial as is no longer as beneficial as actually having people in the office, right? But I think it's like thirding, seconding, like what everybody else is saying too.
And Emily, maybe you want to fourth what everybody's been saying?
Yeah, and I have two specific things I think people can try. We've been trying. One is experimenting with new routines and rituals on your team. So some might not work, some might resonate really well, and you just don't know until you've tried. And like AK said, taking the time to do that. So like one of them, for example, is like when we're getting on a team meeting with my little 3-person team, it's like we'll have a mini like assignment at the beginning, like show something from your desk that you like, or how did you make your coffee this morning? Like just like something that's a little bit different than like what's the weather like, or I mean, even though I love talking about weather. And then the other thing that we've been trying from the internal comm side is in our all hands, or which are recorded and shared after too, is that we've been using Loom content to actually show off people's personality more. So I've been basically editing supercuts of things, like when people's pets appear in Looms, I find like a bunch of those and just edit those together with music. And so they're really fun, and we watch them all together with people who are live on the call. And so it does create this sense of like joy and connection, and glimpses into people's lives or personalities. Like one time we played one during an all hands of just one of my colleagues who could not figure out how to do the confetti button. And it was like a 2-minute Loom of her just trying to figure out how to do the confetti. And so just stuff like that just allows people to laugh a little bit and let their work self down. And one of the ways that hybrid work can do that is through these interesting new communication tools where we show off our personalities in different ways.
I love it. Awesome. So that concludes our conversation. Thank you everybody for your time. For everybody who watched this recording, thanks for watching the recording as well. And that's all.
Thanks so much for having us.